Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. Hope you're all well. And we're live. Let's see who we have in the chat. I think we have the chat going from yesterday, right? Yeah, there was some people here yesterday, but it looks like it's refreshed or something. I don't know what happened with that. But anyway, let me get my presentation ready before I meet and greet. There we go. Let's get that on the side. All right. Okay, I already had somebody backstage, but they seem to have disappeared. Their name was Andrew. But anyway, let's see who we have. Assalamu alaikum, Arif. Good to see you. Don't know what that is. That's probably a conversation that was going on. And hello, Tho. Alaikum assalam. All right, okay. So, what am I going to talk about? It's a brief presentation today. It's about the verse which is typically said to be about polygamy. Of course, there's a difference between polygamy and polygyny. Polygyny is a man married to multiple wives. Polygamy can either be a man married to multiple women, wives, or a woman married to multiple men. But that in itself is called polyandry, I think, or something like that. But polygyny is specifically one man, multiple wives. Okay. So I'm going to talk about mainly about the phrasing of the part which says twos, 2, 3, or 4, right? مثنى وثلاث ورباع, which isn't the normal, in Arabic it's not the normal 1, 2, or 3, right? It's in a different form, and I just like to put some ideas about why that is. But first, let's talk a little bit about the verse itself. As many know nowadays, of course, at least among Quranists or people who re-look at this verse, that it's really all about the orphans, right? The verse itself, it's commonly called the polygamy or polygyny verse, though it's more accurately to be called the welfare for orphans verse, right? The verse is all about the orphans. It's about welfare for orphans. It isn't really about polygamy or polygyny, right? It's not about that. That's not what the focus is. The whole verse from beginning to end is all about the orphans, right? Isn't it like a bait and switch? Okay, it isn't something which is okay. Let's talk a little about orphans, but I'm really going to talk about polygamy or polygyny. No, it's not that. Okay, the verse itself and the Quran as a whole, it neither encourages nor discourages polygyny. All right, it's not being encouraged and it's not being discouraged. Right, we're not when God isn't micromanaging our marriages in this sphere. Right, it's not saying encouraging it or discouraging it, right, in any way. And nor is there any conditions on it. Like there are some now, I think, for example, Mr. Shahrur, I remember him saying in a video I watched of him a while ago when he was asked, is it okay to marry without the intention of looking after orphans? And he gave I don't think he gave like a straight answer. He gave an answer where it was like, I wouldn't I wouldn't remove the condition of the verse or something like this, right? But it isn't. There's no condition in the verse. It's not being put as a condition, right? It isn't that if you want to have more than one wife, right, you must look after orphans, right? There's no condition being placed on polygyny even in the Quran, right? There's nothing about that. What is happening here is that the verse is being utilized for the welfare of orphans. The the fact that the Arabs had polygyny is being utilized for the welfare and the upkeep of orphans, right? Those at the time. Just give me a second. Okay, so that's what's happening now. That opens up the question, of course, if the Arabs didn't have polygyny, right? If this wasn't part of their urf, if it wasn't part of their customs, right? Would this be something that the Quran would recommend for upkeep of orphans? That's a valid question. Okay, would we have a verse like this, basically? So I don't know. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. Okay, but the point is, the Arabs did have polygyny, and this verse is utilizing that for the welfare and for the upkeep of orphans. Okay, so let's actually look at the verse, how it starts. We've seen it before, of course. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعولوا. Okay, so it says, and if you, now here what I would say is that when خفتم ألا تقسطوا, and if you, well, who is being addressed here? Who is being addressed? What's being addressed is the community at large. Okay, I've amended this translation a bit. What's being addressed here is the community at large. If you as a community at large are being fearful, you don't have the institutions available, you haven't erected the institutions to look after orphans properly. Okay, you don't have orphanages, for example, as now. You don't have social care workers to look after, to come in and see and check on orphanages, make sure they're being run properly, that no abuse is happening, because a lot of abuse does happen in orphanages, right? If you don't have any systems in place where you are able to treat the orphans as they should be, to give them to look after them properly. Okay, if you can't do that, if the society is not structured itself to be able to do that, then what should happen, right? The individuals should be individuals. فَانْكِحُوا, that should marry مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّن النِّسَاءِ, then marry. Why marry? Well, marry because you want to give homes for these orphans, right? The point of an orphan is that they've lost their mother or their father or both, right? And to be raised properly, nobody looks after a child the way a parent would. Okay, you can put them in an orphanage, I suppose, but they can do well, I suppose, but nobody will be able to look after children the way a parent would be, even if it's an adopted child, right? The parents will be looking after the full needs of the child. Okay, so you marry women in order to take them in, these orphans in, and give them a mother and a father, right? And so they can have parents to look after them. So it says, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, right? Now, why doesn't it just say فَانْكِحُوا مِنَ النِّسَاءِ? Well, why does it have to be مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ? What is this this part here, right? مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. It's often translated like here. The original translation is those that please you, whoever you find pleasing of women, right? Now I would amend that a little bit and say that what's meant is مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Good for what? Okay, طَاب comes from طيب. Also it's used for when fruits are ripe, right? When a fruit is ripe, we say طَاب. طابت الثمار, right? The fruits have become ripe. Okay, they're mature. Okay, so it's not just about finding women who you like, right, and are good for you. The whole point is that it's about the orphans. So you are looking for women who would be good mothers, who are mature women, who are mature enough, who are طاب, who are ripe in their ability to look after orphans, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? It's not فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, or whichever women that you just want or desire, right? No, again, this is all about the orphans, right? So if you're going to go and marry women in order to look after orphans, you're going to be looking for motherly qualities. You're going to look for women who are maybe a bit older, you know, they're maternal, right? Maybe they've looked after children before. Maybe they have their own, right? So it's saying that's what it's saying. Ma taaba lakum, those that seem ripe or mature to you of women, right? And taaba lakum has to be understood in that context of wanting mothers for the orphans. Okay, those are the type of women you want here, right? فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, and then it says مَثْنَى وَثُلَاث وَرُبَاعَ. Now the original translation had or, right? It said, you know, 2 or 3 or 4. Marry 2 or 3 or 4. Again, the wording is not that straightforward, right? 2 is ithnain in Arabic, for example. You just say ithnain, right? Or ithnan. Thalatha is 4. You know, arba'a is thalatha is 3, arba'a is 4, right? But here these forms, mathna, wa thulath, wa ruba'. Okay, we'll talk about them a bit more in a minute. But they are odd forms, right? When people look at this verse, those who know Arabic, they look at it and say, okay, why is it written in that way? I've forgotten what the tafsir say about this, but I guess it wasn't that. Never found it very convincing. You'll find this a lot of the time when you try to read and look through tafsirs and find something of value. A lot of the things they will never stick because they're not very valuable, to be honest, right? There are a lot of gems in tafsir books, and you know, like in Fakhruddin al-Razi and Ibn Ashur, they do have a lot of gems, but it's like, you know, wading through muck, right? You wade through a lot of muck to come out with a few diamonds, when you can just go and, you know, enter a diamond mine yourself, right? But anyway, let's continue. So then it says, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا, but if you fear that you will not be just, right? Now here is where a lot of people get tripped up, right? So you have some people like who want to try to say that by combining this verse and the other verse which says you will never be able to be just between women, right? Between your women. And here it's saying if you fear you won't be just, then marry only one. And then the other verse saying you will never be just. So it's saying that you shouldn't marry more than one, which is ridiculous, right? It's just, you know, you're trying to make the verses butt against each other to come away with what you want, right? Those who say this, of course, want to put forward that no, the Quran is against polygyny, right? That you can only have one wife, right? Well, again, this verse is all about the orphans. It's what's the whole thing from the beginning. What is in وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, and if you fear, you will not be just to who? To women? No, to the orphans, right? To the orphans. And the same thing here. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا, if you fear that you will not be just, it's also about the orphans. But in this case, it's talking about if you fear you will not be able to be just between the orphans themselves, right? So, for example, you marry a woman, right? You take in some orphans, right? She is now their mother, right? Then you marry another woman, right? And she has and you bring in orphans, and now she is like their mother, right? And you have to be just between these orphans. You have to be just between. It's not about between the women. Okay, this verse, it doesn't matter about the women in this verse. Okay, it's about the orphans. You have to be just between the orphans. If you can't be just between the orphans, right, then marry only one. Okay. Also, it could mean to be just between your own biological children and the orphans. Okay. You have to be just between them. And this comes down to understanding a little bit between of the difference between this word here for justice, which is used here, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ لَا تُقْسِطُوا, and the word over here, which is ta'adilu. Okay, you've got qist and you've got adl. So, and you know, I put it here in the translation, right? So, if you feel you'll not be able to deal fairly, I mean, the problem is not very good translation for it. Qist. Here I put it as fairly. Okay. You could put it as just as well here, if you could not be just towards the orphans. Okay. And then it says, or down here at the end, if you fear that you will not be able to deal equally, okay, i.e. to the orphans or between the orphans, then marry only one. Okay. Then marry only one, or ma malakat aymanukum, or you marry ma malakat aymanukum, right? So what is the difference between these? Basically, this is more like qist is more like the absolute justice. So we're talking about the society being fair and looking after the orphans, giving them their rights. Did I put it here? Yes, I did. Okay, so qist is more like about absolute justice, right? To give somebody their due, to give them their rights, how they should be, right? So you're trying to look after the orphans as you should look after the orphans, right? That they deserve to be looked after in a certain way, right? A certain minimum. Okay, that's qist. Qist is like absolute justice, and you can look through the Quran to see examples of that. I just put one verse for each of these. In this case, I went with this verse: Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qist shuhada lillah. Right? We who have faith, be persistently standing up firmly in justice. Here, justice, the word used is qist. We are talking about absolute justice, right? Stand up for justice, right? You have also the other verse, which is that, why did God reveal the scriptures and send the messengers? It's so that mankind could stand up with justice, right? Qist, right? And even when we talk about the verse which says, that God testifies that there is no God but Him. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة أولو العلم قائما بالقسط. And the angels and those of knowledge standing up for qist, for justice, right? That there is no God but God, and again, that's part of an absolute justice to have that testimony for God, right? So you've got that type of justice, and here, of course, it's saying, stand up for justice, even if it's upon ala, upon yourselves or your parents or relatives. Okay, because we're talking about qist, which is something higher, right? Higher absolute justice. Whereas the other one, adl, is about being between people, right? Between things. Okay, it's like relative justice. It's equality. It's to be fair. It's to cut out the cake. You've got a cake, you cut it up fairly, right? Give everybody equal portions, equal amount. It's about equality. Okay, it's between us. Okay, and you have, for example, this verse: وَأُمِرْتُ لِأَعْدِلَ بَيْنَكُمْ, right? Not عَلَيْكُمْ, right? You don't do adl upon people. It's between people. Okay, and it comes from even when the main symbol for justice is the scales, right? The scales, one side of the scales, the other side of the scales, and when they're both equal, in Arabic would say it's adl. Okay, they're equal. Okay, it's about that kind of equality. Okay, so when it comes to this verse, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about being fair, and the society should be able to look after the orphans properly, be fair to them, not leave them behind, right? Provide for them, look after them, and if they can't, then you take in orphans. You marry more than one woman in order to take in orphans. But if you can't deal fairly between the orphans that you've taken in, then you don't do that, right? You marry only one, and that's it. Okay, so that's what it comes down to there. Now, what about? Oh, it didn't come out very well, did it? Why did the formatting come out weird here? Hold on. Let's see if this will change on the fly or not. Okay. See if I refresh this. Okay, Looks better, right? Okay, so why this is the main part really of what I wanted to talk about. The other things I think I don't know if you've mentioned them before, at least in passing. Why these forms of مثنى وثلاث ورباع? Okay, well you have to think of it in terms of a sequence of events, right? You've got a sequence of things happening. You're starting off with a society which has a certain amount of orphans who are not being looked after. What should happen? Those who want, to do this virtuous act of, of taking in another wife in order to look after orphans should do that. Those able to marry a second wife in order to provide a home for orphans should do that, right? And so by doing that, you'll have a number of people who have two wives, right? And they all take in the orphans, and if there's no more orphans left, then it stops there, right? And if you can just imagine that in your mind, right? So now you've got no more orphans left who need to be looked after, and what's the maximum number of people of marriages are? Twos, right? So there's a society which has people who have married two, okay, a maximum, okay. But what if there are still some more orphans, right? What if all orphans have not been looked after? Well, then those who have married two, right, should then go ahead and marry a third to take in some more of those orphans until all of those orphans have been taken in. And now the society has twos and threes, but no fours. Nobody has married four, right? Nobody has four wives. So there are some who are able to take in two wives to make two homes for orphans, and there are those who are then able to take three wives in order to make three homes for orphans. And now all orphans have been sort of used up in society. Okay, but what if they still haven't been used up? What if there are still more orphans? Well, then now those who have three wives and are still able to take a fourth can take a fourth, right? Again, to bring in more orphans until all of the orphans are taken care of, right? So you have to think about it in that kind of sequence. So when you look at it in that kind of way, that's a way you can read why the verse is using that formula, right? فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. So marry those who seem mature to you of women, or ripe to you of women, in twos, threes, and fours, right? It's sequential, okay? We are gradually taking in more and more orphans, right? Twos, and if there's still more, then threes, and if there's still more orphans, then fours. It goes that way. So that's how it comes down. That's what it's all about in the end. So, and when you understand that this verse is in the end, it really is about welfare for orphans. It's not about the man and how many wives he should be allowed or not allowed. It's not about that. It's about looking after orphans. So when you see it like that, and that the purpose is the care of orphans, okay, what happens if four is not enough, right? What about if everybody who is able to marry four wives, who has the finances, the ability to marry four wives, has married four wives, right? And there are still leftover orphans, right? And yet still among those people who have married four wives, there are some who are able to take on a fifth, right? They have the means to be able to do that. Should they be allowed to take on a fifth wife or not, right? In order to look after orphans? Obviously, I think yes, right? I mean, I think it's an obvious thing from the way we look at this verse, and that it really is all about the orphans, right? It's not about really about putting a limit on how many wives a man can have. It's not about recommending polygyny. It's not about discouraging it. It really is about trying to solve a problem, an issue in society, which is when there's a fear, or when society is not looking after the orphans properly, right? So when you see it like that, four wives is not the limit, right? It's not the limit. What would be more pleasing to God, right? That we leave orphans to in a society where they are not being looked after properly, we leave them to fend for themselves, or that men who are able to marry more than four and take in more of those orphans are allowed to. Which would be more pleasing to God? Obviously the latter, right? The concern for orphans in the Quran is huge, right? It's not a small amount at all. It's the welfare for orphans and the importance of looking after them is constantly repeated throughout the Quran. So again, this verse really is just about the orphans, including the numbers. مثنى وثلاث ورباع. It's about the orphans and looking after them. Okay, that's basically all I wanted to share with you today. Hope that was fine. Let me check the chat, and if we have anybody backstage. Dr. Hashmi, Khalil, Adnan, I don't know what it's about, but anyway, that's fine. If anybody else in the chat I need to look at, I'll say hello to. Hey, the informative username. Prophet was not a child molester, that's how he says. I think you changed your username, right? And Assalamu alaikum, perfect dawah. Excellent to see you. Alif, I can see you backstage. I'll bring you on now. Assalamu alaikum.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing, bro?
Great. Assalamu alaikum. I'm doing well. I published my first book on Islam on self-published, let's say. And it's called Who Are the Quranists? Exploring Islam's Second Reformation. I do an analysis of not all of the sects, because there's been quite a lot, but a number of sects in the history, and some living and some extinct, and how they all overlap, and what the usul might be between different people in the community, because there's kind of a catch-all. The whole Quranism, it's really a canard. It's not really a thing. It's kind of like Sunni and Shia Islam is not really a thing. It's just a vague, a catch-all for similarities between more specific ideologies.
Like an umbrella term,
I've been getting some nice. Oh, you have? Well, thank you. I've been getting some nice feedback on it, so it's encouraging.
Yeah. It was. You showed me about that, and for those listening, the brother already shared it with me, and it was really nice, reading through part of it. I haven't gone around to reading all of it, but I did get to read some quite, some chunks of it, and it was really well done. I was very impressed.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm working on investigating what the actual Injil is, and that has already revealed some interesting details. I'm going to take a little more time instead of just cranking it out. Well, the thing is, I cranked this out in a few months, and it was really like a year worth of soaking in things in Islam and seeing a lot of inanity and lessening. Some things inspired perhaps on social media, and getting a sense of what the ummah's like these days. So let's talk about polygamy a little bit. It's an interesting thing. I think I would push back a little bit on the idea that 4 is not a limit, because if you were a very wealthy fellow and you had 4 wives, and you wanted to help orphans, you can simply donate to the. I mean, you can do this with 1 wife also, right? I by the way, I do. I don't want to make it a Rias thing, but some people just need to eat, and so I can't even really afford it. But inshallah, be able to afford to help more people. And at some level, and a lot of these people are orphaned by often war. Sometimes just a guy dies, or widowed as well. So there's the circumstances. Like the modernist critique is that was back then. This is now. So this context is the context circumscribed by history or not? This is a big thing, along with is it Mubin or allegorical, and a few other levers of how you read things. But I think definitely.
Well, what I would say, I mean, just to butt in a little bit there, I would say, I mean, I would agree. Yes, I mean, what a wealthy person would ideally do, would, instead of a very wealthy person, not take a 5th wife, but for example, he'd be able to sponsor another man to take a 2nd wife or a 3rd or a 4th.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would love to be able to do that kind of
because
thing.
what you're saying is that, okay, just donate money. the issue for orphans isn't that it's not always a money issue. Right? It's not really about funds and giving them. They need parents, right? They need stable homes, right? You need somebody to really look after them. A father figure, a mother figure. And we are seeing. I mean, of course, at the time of the Quran, people didn't study the effects of fatherlessness or these sort of things on children. But now we know how detrimental it can be to not have a father or a mother in your life, right? And so just having let's donate money to orphans in an orphanage, for example. That might not be enough, and especially if there's a lot of abuse which happens in orphanages. There's a lot of sex trafficking which happens in orphanages right now.
Yes.
People really don't know what the state of a lot of things that happens to orphans these days. It is bad, right? So
Yeah, it's a big problem in my country
yeah,
as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
it's
it?
almost like a mafia. So
Yeah, yeah.
pretty bad.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I've helped some orphanages with indirectly with money, but also indirectly through advice. Sometimes people in the developing world, they'll raise $10,000 or $20,000 for a business plan,
mm,
and then they'll do the business badly. And instead of
mm,
acquiring assets, they want to like get a really high return on the capital, so they'll take on liabilities, not necessarily debt, but some other kind of contractual liability. And then maybe
mm,
things don't work out, and they get into another cash crunch, and then it's like that makes them more in a more difficult position to raise money because they're already raising money on like a wing and a prayer in the first place.
mm,
So for instance, a brother who's not a Muslim but who's I think he's a Christian, did a lot of the lifting in the funding, and this orphanage went from not owning the property to owning the property, building structures on it, building a greenhouse, making the school more of a business, including kids who don't live there attending and paying fees and whatnot. Um, and so, so that stabilized. That was a business plan that actually, I mean, it was like a 6-figure investment that was needed to get it standing on its own legs.
mm,
So that is possible. And at some scale, that's kind of the best that you could do, probably, because there are just so many orphans.
mm,
But yeah, as far as like, is polygamy a good idea for this? Um, like, it's not mustahab, right? So it's not like kufr to question it. Like, like I think the reason that this question of justice has this dual layering to it is that God knows that He did not design women to like sharing men. At some level, if a man is at a local maxima of being very sexy and wealthy and or high status, like a rock star would be a great example, then they're motivated temporarily to be very much blinded to any downside to this, and they'll, you have groupies and so on. Of course, that's Zina, but when you actually then put things in marriage and you actually have to live with the relationship, um, I question how sustainable it is emotionally. Whereas if it's a guy who's like 35 to 45 and a woman who's like 25 to 35 or older, and she's already been married, she's widowed, or divorced in a way where it was not really her fault, um, and she's a war refugee, like life has dealt her a hand. Her cotter has not been kind. So she's still going to experience a diminution of the intensity of the emotional bond, feelings of jealousy, probably some other. Those are the two major ones. And these are adaptations that are either naturally reactionary, the jealousy, or that feeling less invested in the bond, not uninvested, but less invested. Maybe not even proportionally less invested. Maybe you have 3 wives and they're all 25% less emotionally invested. So on a net basis, that's 175%, right? But it's a real thing that women in polygamy experience in order to cope with the jealousy. And it's not, in a way,
mm,
it's essential, it's natural. And then also we
I mean,
see that
yeah, I mean,
statistically.
when you talk about that, let me ask you: do you think it's there's a difference between men and women in that regard? Like, like for example, I think women which are much more acceptable, or they would much they would accept the idea of um, a man with multiple wives, and or them being the second or third. For example, you find women. I mean, no, but the issue also of polygyny, right, is that it's the first wives that don't that get upset, right? Um, the 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 women who are second
I
or
would
who
say
come
that
on, the women who come
that's
on,
harder.
who accept to be, they're the ones who are accepting, but they're agreeing. You would have no polygyny without women agreeing to it, right? On the other
Right,
side,
but they have a
men I
honeymoon
don't think would
period.
ever agree. Men I don't think would ever agree. Most men, at least, won't agree to the opposite, right? So I think there's a difference in that. I
Well,
think it comes down
so
to the way
there's a
men and
meme
women are
here.
jealous. Hmm.
So in I don't want to say kafir culture because this is epistemically sloppy, but in secular culture, open relationships have become a thing for like 10 years now. And the
Hmm.
meme is that every time a guy wants this because he thinks there's going to be net upside for him in it, his
Hmm.
lady goes off and is able to get laid left and right, and
Hmm.
he's paying for boosts on Hinge. He can't even get a date, maybe,
Hmm.
and it's quite ruinous for them. And so and then yeah, they end up regretting it, right? Or there are situations where women are in polyamory, they have a husband and a boyfriend, and they don't seem super happy about it either, right? So people are trying this, and we're getting some anecdotal smatterings of data. Yeah, it just seems like there are inherent trade-offs in this, right? So let's be realistic. And I've done a fair amount of research on it because obviously I like women, so I was curious, right? And I did not find the Grail. The closest thing to the Grail that I've found are women who have um, who are very much in Islam. So like I've talked to women who are from the East about polygyny, and their attitude is basically like it's part of Islam. But I think they're still naive about what it's like to be in polygyny for 5 years, 10 years, 20, to die in polygyny, to like stick with it. It's a lot. As opposed
I think
to
people are
they
just
get
naive about
disillusioned, and
marriage.
then what's that?
I think people are naive about marriage itself. Never mind what it's like to
Also,
be. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
but it's easier with monogamy, and of course, people are there's parental
I know. Look,
alienation when monogamous marriages collapse, and all of these other problems come in
mm,
with monogamy. So,
I mean,
yeah, it's not
I've
like
heard, I've heard all ways. To be honest, I mean, I know. Um, literally, I know like women who actually prefer it. They prefer their husbands to have. They're saying it's better to have it's nice having a co-wife, right? Um, their friends. It depends on the on the whole relationship as well. But it's
between the
nice to have
women.
a co-wife. It's less trouble. I've spoken to men who have multiple wives, and they say, yeah, it's easier. And then I've heard other men who say, no, it's hell having more than one wife. And others say, no, the trouble is
Yeah,
actually much easier. Um, but in terms of what you said before, and in terms of how naturally the jealousy and that sort of thing, I think that when it comes to the jealousy side, I think most the jealousy of men and women is rooted very differently. I think that the jealousy of a man is he's jealous of like the woman herself, like physically she's mine, right? Whereas I think the
sure,
jealousy of women is more a jealousy of fear of being left for somebody else, right? So a lot of the jealousy that you find in polygyny, I suspect, when there's that tension, part of that tension is a fear that okay, she's being compared with the other wife, and then maybe in the end he will divorce me and keep her, right? That sort of thing. So
sure.
whatever I suspect is that when women feel safe and secure with the man that they have, that jealousy is not as strong. That's my suspicion.
Yeah, what one woman told me, she's I suppose still is sanguine on the prospect, is that she likes knowing exactly where she stands, and she likes not being misled about bad news. So if the extent, but this is still an estimate of damage, you see. So as long as the estimate, like, but that honesty and the ability to plan, the stability, it's kind of like Hobbes's idea of the Leviathan, that the government, the impression of government strength is oppressive, but it's a trade-off we accept in order to be able to make plans in the medium to long term. So I would say this fits in with that. So like studies will show that like 20% of women will say maybe polygyny. So that kind of means if he's like rich and usually and attractive, which is not
Well, that's
super
a lot. I
rare.
mean, 20% is 1 in 5, right?
Right. And then another 20% will
A lot.
say that they would accept it. So this does mean that there are minority. So I think the 20% who say maybe, I wouldn't want to bank on that because I feel like it's too much anchored on material things. But the other 20%, yeah, sure, there may be a minority of women who are more inherently disposed to it, or who are disposed to it by psychological factors that have a very strong male role model concept that it makes them more accepting, and things of this nature. But then also, I don't think guys in their 20s are ready for this. I think that it's good to, and I don't think it's what, like, I've seen some Muslim influencer in Malaysia, for instance, who was like 20, 21, and he had some money from being an Instagram fashion guy. So I guess in their fic, that's okay. And he had 4 wives who were all like 19. So they were just a few years younger than him. He just married them like one after another. And then he's taking the photo ops. And maybe this is a little impetuous. And that's even more unusual. Usually guys will get experience in monogamy. It's challenging to get good at being a husband to one woman, and then you grow through that, and maybe 5-10 years you have one child, then that adds a lot of problems, and you have to deal with that. You might think, well, a second wife would make it easier. Yeah, but maybe it makes it maybe not, in some ways yes, in some ways no. So then, having gained a certain amount of experience, then they maybe go, okay, now I've gotten somewhere, I own this home, got an investment portfolio, see a certain amount of capital, then you can acquire another residence in order to really shore, or you do it like a mizyar style marriage with somebody who's maybe a little bit older than you, or she's like a doctor, and she put off marrying all these years to be a doctor, and now she feels like priced out of the marriage market at like 33 or something like that. So there's always these trade-offs that push things more into the realm of being plausibly stable in these type situations. And then the first wife has made this long-term commitment, and her whole life maybe is anchored on this, right? Maybe she doesn't have a career or whatever, even as a diversification. And, the premise of the deal is a monogamous premise. So with that premise even being suggested, there was a brother in the Qur'anic sub today whose wife is ready to divorce him because he talked about it over the phone because he was just super horny, and he was kind of joking, and it like came out. And now she doesn't trust him. She's all cagey. Now you could say, well, there's some underlying issues there beyond that, but I think it's an extreme example of something that is more common than not, which is, in order to pursue this, you have to, like, so what I'm saying is that it's not smart to just dive into it as a young guy when you're just if you can make the money to pull it off, and you're like young and sexy, and it's like, ooh, I don't think that's wise. But then again, I do think monogamy is a good level 1 to be able to graduate to this, having also advanced significantly in all respects in life, in taqwa, in self-care, physical health, mental health, you're on deen, that you've acquired the taqwa and the shukr and the sabr. And last but not least, the sabr. You need the sabr. It's like you're not going to make it. You'll be in hell, as you've heard some
I
guys
think a
say.
lot of it has to be, there has to be some cultural wisdom in it as well, in terms of the cultures where polygyny has been prominent. They know how to deal with it. The women are more accepting of it, and there will be wisdom just inherited, which it's not written down anything of men knowing how to handle the situation, and women advising each other on how to handle the situation, right? But when it starts to be practiced in a completely alien in a culture where it's not really been there at all, right? Then
Right.
I can see huge amounts of problems there. Like for example, in I used to remember the Somalis in the UK, right? Um, they had many wives, right? And the women would look for wives for their husbands, right? And it was
That's
a
the way to
normal
do
thing.
it.
Yeah, it was a
If you have a
normal thing
wife who's
because
willing to do that and she feels in
yeah,
control, that is where you have the highest success rate in terms of longevity
yeah,
and satisfaction.
because
Yeah.
it was normal part of their culture and stuff like that. So it was common in Somalia. Same thing in Nigeria a while back as well. It used to be the same sort of thing, right? But when you have, for example, somebody an English person convert and he decides I'm going to try to have multiple wives. He's got
Yeah.
no concept of that. He's not seen that working in society. His parents haven't seen that. His cousins haven't seen that. There's nothing, there's no like wisdom or best practice, which is sort of like in the atmosphere, which he's sort of grown up around it, seen it around it happening, and so
Right. And,
it's
and if he's married already to an English woman, even
yeah,
of some
exactly,
ethnic,
exactly,
second, fourth generation, whatever, but she's
yeah,
like a
yeah,
Christian or she's in a secular, what I would call post-Christian ideology, most likely, it's going to be disruptive. So he has to be
yeah,
willing to basically reorg his whole life. So like Morocco, for example, despite being continentally on Africa, you're very unlikely to find a woman who's going to accept polygamy. Sub-Saharan Africa, as you're pointing out, is going to be the converse. There they have a sub obviously minority, because this is how the numbers fall, where
mm,
it's the biggest polygamy rates. And of course, you also
mm,
have the most extreme poverty. This is also a correlation that we
yeah,
cannot ignore.
mm,
That this tempers expectations about trade-offs, right? So I'm just trying to be realistic. I mean, like, this was revealed according to the context, the tradition, around after the Battle of Badr, when there were massive casualties. So these women on the
the
market would
the,
be
the
predominantly
Battle of Uhud
widows
actually,
in this
not.
context.
Yeah, it was Battle of
Uhud.
Uhud, no? Yeah, Uhud, yeah. In Badr,
Okay.
the one that were casualties. It was Uhud. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Hmm.
So, oh, do you know who Maddie Tijani is?
No, Mahdi Tijani.
He's
I mean, Tijani is a
Yeah,
famous name, of course, famous
right.
tribe.
He's North African, and that's a
Yeah.
Tariqa and a saint, and it's a very popular name. Is also a big guy who converted to 12 or Shiism. He wrote a book about it. Who looked at
Oh,
me? So
him.
yeah, I mean, it's a
Yeah, yeah, I
common
know.
enough
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
Yeah, he's Algerian English, and his father later on in life did polygamy. So he had that example, and he had so he's sort of a little bit of a Salafist in his disposition towards Islam, but and you can see that come through sometimes, but he's quite reasonable. So for instance, the other day he was quoted talking about that angel hadith that every Muslim woman hates, and
Hmm.
how if you feel the need to quote this hadith to emotionally black or spiritually blackmail your wife, and he advises men who just have one wife as well. And he happens to have three. He also has two ex-wives, right? And a significant parental alienation situation, and so
Hmm.
on. So he's been through it all. And so you can kind of see the upsides and the downsides of this, but at least he acknowledges that if you're quoting the hadiths at a woman to
Yeah.
coerce intimacy out of her, that it's not intimacy that you're going to get. It's going to be something else. And
Hmm.
basically you're cooked at that point. You got to rethink your whole approach. So he through experience he's gained enough wisdom that he teaches good stuff, even if his disposition is somewhat Salafist. So I respect the brother. Of course, he has also he's a part of this vanguard of like Andrew Tateism, but he's better than that. So I just want to give him the respect he's due. But like I've
Hmm.
seen like in the Muslim marriage thread, for instance, a woman complaining in a monogamous marriage that they're newlyweds, been together like a year, things are going great. And then he started internalizing some of this this Islamic Chavismo, not like chauvinism, rather, not like from Venezuela, Chavismo. I'm spinning things into Spanish. And then he stopped. He thought it was weak of him to be a generous lover, and then the marriage just started to like get worse because of this stuff. So in the book, I write in the chapter on progressive Islam versus Quranism. This issue is kind of one of the dividing lines, along with, is homosexuality acceptable or gay marriage, maybe, this kind of thing. This is usually where you can just draw a distinction. And it ties into birth rates, and you could also think of it deeply about the Quran, that the relationship between men and women is a microcosm of the relationship with the society as a whole. And the relationship between God and humanity. We have placed between you mercy, and we've created mates for you and placed between you mercy and compassion as signs for those who would contemplate. So mercy and compassion, of course, are in the superlative, the most popularly used names of God in the Quran. Oh yeah, it's true. Mostly kufr is mentioned and denial in the Meccan surahs. But they are mushrik, so it's kind of they overlap.
Yeah, not just no. What it is that he's asking me a question because I've mentioned before that the very earliest Meccan surahs, and yes, that's true. The very earliest Meccan surahs, they don't mention shirk at all. Even root shirk is not in the earliest surahs. So the earliest Meccan surahs, even the root sharaka, the three letter root for shirk, it doesn't come up. It doesn't come up in the first in the first few years of the Quran's revelation, which is a very interesting thing.
Well, the Quran kind of graduates from this initial Dawah project into interfaith critique later on, more in the Mecca period, where they engage with the Jews of Hybar and the Byzantine Orthodox Christians. But anyway, getting back to this polygamy stuff. So, I mean, my TLDR is that, yes, it can work. It's going to be difficult for a guy. You're going to probably be better at it when you're older, and then you're not going to be as have much of an appetite to actually sustain the business, not just in private intimacy, but in the public intimacy and the emotional upkeep. A lot of middle-aged guys that are monogamous, they get hobbies and things because the kids get older, and then they're like, okay, I'm gonna do scholarship, I'm gonna make a video game, I'm gonna build bottle rockets, whatever, right? So this is what you can do with your life if you don't have multiple wives, right? So the trade-off is yours to make. And for the women, likewise, it's always gonna have a bitter medicine to it, but it can work, it can be better. It makes more sense for a woman if she has fewer options. So a woman in her early 20s, it's like maybe the guy seems super cool and it's like, I'll do polygamy because he's an S tier guy. But maybe I don't have enough data to say, but maybe that's less sustainable. It's definitely something that attracts people to convert, that attracts men to convert to Islam with some naivete. And could it correct the demographic crisis that affects the world at large? I would say maybe, but this data we tend to see where women in polygamy tend to have like 1 or 2 children. They don't want to get 4 or 5 children. Maybe that's fine. Like that can still put a dent in these numbers. Especially if we like make Islam make more sense through this sort of reformation process, and it isn't tainted with so much shaitan as this prior Salafi Reformation has inflicted it. And we've calibrated the mistakes of the Muslim Empire tradition. And then, okay, so it's easier to get into Islam and stay in it. Like that's like number one, right? And then actually practicing and getting the fruits of the deen, people are better at being married. They become more qualified for polygamy. And then we have a phenomenon where the Zoomers are not even having sex, which maybe says good. They're not doing Zina, but they're like unable to form pair bonding connections of any kind, basically. We're at a statistically worse situation. And then our generation, I have a feeling we're both in the 35 to 45 age range. Our generation, there's a lot of women in their 30s who have money, so that's good. That's how the mizyar thing comes in. That can be a part of, you do a different than standard nikah. And they just don't, there's not that many men who are either qualified or interested in being husbands. So maybe this crop of like super husbands can like serve that void by doing polygamy in a more progressive way, not quoting angel hadiths and being really enlightened about it. And then, as the Quran says, people are still going to be unhappy, even if you're Superman. So expect
like
it.
I said, I mean,
But like,
that's the verse which people use, right? That you will never be able to be fair between the women, no matter how hard you try. When harastum, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah,
but just
because God
don't
didn't
leave
make them that way.
just
He
don't
knows.
leave them. Don't leave. Don't. The verse then says, "La tamilu kull al-mayl." Don't like incline to so much to one. Just don't overly incline. Forget about trying to be completely fair and completely share out everything exactly fairly. You're not going to be able to do that, but just don't incline too much to one, right?
Yeah, and you have to be willing to let them go if they're just totally unhappy, right? And that's
Yeah,
tough.
of course. Yeah.
So there's an emotional temperament with monogamy that a lot of men, maybe more now in our generation and our parents' generation and kind of our grandparents' generation, of like, I'm really happy in monogamy. Like, my wife is my best friend. This is not really the norm for marriage historically. And if you're going to do polygamy, you have to be ready to get knocked into a different disposition that's a little bit more, I don't want to say aloof, but judicious, let's say, that you're really in a different position than this bilateral best friendship thing. So, I mean, I'll say my wife is my best friend. And then, there are aspects of the marriage that I would like to be a little bit more going my way. And but she does attachment parenting. So that's another thing, is that women haven't historically done attachment parenting. This is the same theme. And it has clear benefits, and it makes people less psycho, or conversely more well-adjusted teenagers and adults. And it just involves, like, you get something for that investment, but it takes investment. So I think maybe we can combine all this stuff. And then I wanted to comment on
Can you tell me something about
434.
attachment? Can you tell me something about attachment parenting? What is that?
So it's like, basically, you as the husband are going to get displaced. You don't just like pop the baby out and then 6 weeks later you're like back to business. It's like the baby's sleeping with you. So your time gets dominated. You're just going to put more time to the child. She's going to breastfeed past 2 years old and let child-led weaning, just, Montessori type learning, just spending a lot more time and focus on the child,
Okay.
instead of what our great grandmothers who had 8 children or whatever would have done, that's just not feasible, right? So they're going to do more assembly line style parenting, where you're delegating to the 4-year-olds to watch the 2-year-olds, kind of a thing, right? Because that's the only way they could do it.
Yeah.
And then the father's like, okay, honey, it's my turn to be the man. No, it's like, look, the kids come first. And maybe this is not healthy. I think it is kind of healthy, but it has trade-offs. Just like polygamy. Like, it can be healthy, but it has trade-offs, right? And then I guess the man would be left put out if he has multiple wives. So you could like take something that's very progressive and take something that people would call atavistic, like polygamy, put them together, and maybe it nets out. I don't know. It remains to be seen. So how we interpret like 434, I think, plugs into this. So I missed. I was napping through when you did that episode. I would have loved to come on. I think this verse it's actually theological in its implications, because if you take it literally, it doesn't seem like it's very good advice. So the Sunni explanation is that this was like a regrettable thing, and in the Hadith, it's like circumscribed, and we just do the little tap with the fingers. But if you look at the history of fiqh in the Sunni tradition, that's a lie. That's like the Salafist thing of like, oh, the Quran's a science book for dawah. Like we'll say whatever to get you to say shahada, kind of a thing. Because they had fiqh of like, you know, you can like hit your wife with like a leather whip as long as it's not too thick and stuff. Like this went on for centuries. So it's not like a quick hadith in the wake of the revelation fixed it. But that's the Sunni apologia. The Shia version is that there are hadiths from Imam Ali, radiallahu anhum, and other imams that really truncate this through their wisdom. And they're like these nice guys. So there's a whole other kettle of fish with 12er Shiism, and Ismaili Shiism is very esoteric. And I feel like it's a whole other episode. But, you know, they have that. And then there's the modernist thing, which is to say, you know, it's all truncated by context, which is kind of how you were reading it. And then there's the Quranist thing, like Joseph A. Islam's reading, which is to say, well, if you really study the Quran holistically, this is the only time that Dabura does not have a direct object. And that would make it even more dangerous. Like you can kill a woman with your bare fist with one hit, right? So where you strike is actually very important. Therefore, it doesn't mean strike. It's metaphorical. But he said, well, if it's metaphorical, this is a verse prescribing rules. It should be mubin, not mutashabihat, right? And so my take is that if you look at the whole thing in Christianity, like if this is a Sahih Hadith from Isa alayhi salam about what is translated as don't divorce, basically, right? But in the context, it means basically do not strike out, do not put out your wife. Like you can't unilaterally fire her. It's unjust. That was the gist of it. Because how else, you know, like they had polygamy in the Paul's letters. He said a bishop should be husband to only one wife. That implies he wasn't condemning polygamy among the Christian laity. And obviously, it's not. It's in the Torah. It's not explicitly abrogated in the Injil. So we might make some sense of what that means. So Christians take that too far, and it's like, okay, you got a one-shot marriage, and it's got to be perfect. And no matter how much you're suffering or how bad your spouse is, you can't leave. So Islam corrects this, right? But then the Sunnis go in the other direction, and they say, well, a man has the right to just divorce a woman unilaterally, just like in the Torah. If you find something unclean in her, then ciao, right? And I've seen women on the Muslim marriage thing. They just got triple talaqed, and it's brutal. It's unjust. I don't think it's it's not the right thing to take away from it. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask, is that a way? I didn't know that was in the Torah as well, right? That the man can just divorce unilaterally. Is that's
well, if you find something unclean in her, so what does that mean? It could mean anything, right? But so it's not unilateral, but basically it's unilateral. So the Shia have some fiqh on divorce where you need to have, it's like more like firing with cause. It's not just unilateral, but there's a range of reasons for it that you could go by, not just infidelity, which is what the Protestants end up on. So my take on Dabura being strike out is that God is not untricky, which isn't to say that God is tricky, but that God does test us, and I've been studying the Bible, obviously trying to figure out how all this stuff fits together and where the mistranslations were. And it's actually a little bit consistent throughout, that there are key words. For instance, the Trinity thing, it depends on whether Eshad, which is like Ahad, or Yachshin, which is like Wahid, is used, and then they're both used in ways that they have fringe context meanings. So, you know, this whole thing of God communicating to us through text is not a straightforward process, and there's this dimension of hikmah, the book and the hikmah, right? And so if you have hikmah, you know that it's better to just do a trial separation than to hit your wife, because even if you're in a society where you won't catch a case for doing so, it surely isn't going to make things better. And there have been a lot of men who, maybe it will make things better, and they hit their wives. And the women will accept it for maybe a few hits. Maybe the men end up killing them, then they're guilty, but it's like, it's a slippery slope. So I think of the theology as like a scalar field, but there's an elegance underlying this stuff. It's not just the Asheri thing of, the thematic attribute of God is power, and therefore God can do whatever and he can say whatever. And by the way, there's this hadith that you have to accept about a child marriage, and if you don't submit to God, this kind of a thing, right? This is a thematic thing. And then our Adika, I think, and we don't get this from the Mu'tazila, but we are sort of Mu'tazila in the way we approach the deen, and we get it from the Quran. And I realized this when I was debating a Christian guy, and I was talking about God having unified attributes. And when you did that episode on the mercy of hell and how the justice and mercy are not like dueling constituent deities within God that have a dialectic, that they're the same thing, right? So that's Mu'tazila theology. But if the unifying theme is Adl, as the Mu'tazila call themselves, the people of Tawhid Adl, then 434 leaves a lot to be desired, because the word choice could have easily been better, right? But it's intentionally shitty. No, astaghfirullah. I shouldn't say that, especially about God. But it is bad. Like, it could be a lot better, and it's intentionally that challenging so that we can put it into the context with the Injil, and so that we can put it into the context with the march of history, that, like I said with the Jews and Christians episode, that liberalism is a mixed bag, but it contains to come from the Quran, and that it's not just a bunch of kufr that made the world better. This was a part of God's plan, and women being able to just leave instead of having to get hit is a part of that, and that Dabura defaulting to separation instead of like a physical strike is what you get when you scale the wisdom through the history, or herstory, if you will. That was my rant about 433. So, I think this is good, because a lot of people's faith are super challenged by this, and this sort of master plan theory.
It's good. It's good to hear it, to hear that perspective being put out there. So yeah, I mean, when I did last when it was 2 weeks ago, the last stream, it wasn't directly about that verse. It was more about I was comparing it with the other verse in the same surah, which talks about yeah, exactly. So you did see it, yeah? All right. Okay. Yeah.
I did. I loved it. I wish I was there. Well, about that, people say that it's shirk to have a constitution that isn't just the Quran. But on that same note, the Quran, one of the seeds of liberalism, if you will, that's in the Quran, is governed by mutual consent, ashura, which they did try to do, and that was handled badly, was lamented by Umar, and was the seed of the Hajarite Shia Sunni sectarian rift as well, right? But there is a tradition in here that we could have done ashura better, right?
Well, it wasn't a shura.
That means
the issue with the early split, the Saqifa, is it wasn't a shura, right? Like the Saqifa wasn't a shura, nor did they go with the wasiyah of the Prophet, and it was in what Umar said, it was كانت فلتة, right? It was like a one-off stumble, okay, which God protected the ummah from. And that's basically like what he said. كانت فلتة وقى الله شرها. It was a filter. It was the shura. The shura was the one that was done with the Uthman elected, right? But even then, that was a bizarre shura, because the shura wasn't really done in that kind of way. It was sort of like delegated to one person, and he went around asking everybody, which it's not the same as a shura, right? It's not the same as a shura, but in the end, that's what happened.
Well, and then traditionally it was interpreted as you have an absolute monarch under the Quranic constitutional limits who should talk to people about what he does. So it's a pretty minimalist way of interpreting it. And then you can say, well, the United Republic. Okay, so we'll have an Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Well, that's not going great. So, shura, like so many other key points in the Quran, is something very valuable that is left as an exercise to the reader, where extra Quranic guidance or wisdom, more vaguely, might be useful to define it better. But the point is that it allows you that it's not shirk to do other things that aren't explicitly in the Quran, just like it's not kufr to make an agreement with your wife that you won't hit her except unless, I don't know, she like hits you first or something maybe reasonable like that, right? And then you know where you stand, right? So like the Quran explicitly outlines ports, like a USB port, where you can plug in other things and with God's permission, essentially. So I think that's a nice point to leave off and let on someone else.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So that's all. Yeah. But that's exactly what I wanted to show of that verse last stream. It wasn't so much to go into 4:3:34. It was just to show that look, you know, if a woman fears nushuz from her husband, you know, they can make an agreement about that. It's not something where she's stuck, right? Okay, brother. Nice. By the way, do you have the link to the book? Maybe I can put it in the chat now.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop it right here.
Yeah. Drop it into the chat for everybody else to have a look. Yeah, and maybe I'll
close by saying that the efficacy of a religion is incumbent on its ability to sustain a population in it, which involves both net positive demographic growth, reproduction, and that people don't apostatize. And both of these hinge on stable families, which are binded by stable and maybe not totally ecstatically happy, but satisfactory marriages. And if men and women cannot come to, so like a lot of sisters are afraid to get married to Muslim men because they are afraid that they're going to be like Salafist machistas, you know, and they're just like, I'll pass. And then they're not like that invested in the Hadith that it's half your deen to get married. So they generally feel like I have the option to pass on marriage. And, you know, strictly speaking, you do, even if it's half the deen. So we need to do well in this. Maybe polygamy is overachieving, is putting the cart before the horse if you can't do the baseline right. But yeah, it's actually fundamental to the whole project that we do marriage well and that we make women happy, inshallah.
It is, inshallah. I don't know if this person is asking about you. Walaikum salam. Maybe this guy is asking about you. I'm not sure. He said Arif, but maybe he means you, I think.
I don't have a channel. I kind of am liking just publishing books on the website that the brother's gonna copy paste and staying sued for now. And I might make a channel later to cover, like if I actually, for instance, get a lot of money, inshallah. So it's open to whether God will create that qadr for me or not. Then I may or may not do polygamy. And then I'll probably give advice to young men about it if I do, because it's worth sharing. So in that circumstance, I might do it. But right now, I'm just popping in on people's chats and talking about the really important stuff regarding theology and scholarship. And I feel like that's more pure because I'm not hustling growth and I'm not playing these games that some influencers play where they make it all about public approval, which might nullify the reward of what I'm doing. It may skew my biases in shirky or otherwise negative ways and so on. And it's just a lot of effort. So, you know, it's the scholarship's a lot of effort, and I also have a business and a family. So, you know, I got enough on my plate. But thanks for asking. I appreciate that you would ask. I really do. MashaAllah.
Okay, brother. Nice to have you.
Right.
Then bring on this is somebody else waiting. So Jazakallah khair, and hopefully see you back soon.
Inshallah. Alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam wa rahmah. Yes, I've put his the website which he made on in the chat. Be sure to have a look at it because it is very well done. Oh yeah, look, yeah, he did mean you. I thought so. All right, okay. Brother Submitter, assalamu alaikum, bringing you on now.
Salam alaikum. Peace be with you, brother.
All right. Alaikum assalam.
Yes, I've been watching your channel for a little while now. I'm I also am good friends with brother Muji from
Ah, yes.
Perfect Dawa, right? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And he often recommends your channel, and
Hmm.
so I decided to look it up, and I really enjoyed what I've seen so far. And I wanted to speak a little bit about a topic that was a little funny to me, but it's scary at the same time. And I mentioned that in the comment too,
Hmm.
and we spoke a little bit about it. It's about the Hadith, right? The narration about those who do not go to pray at the mosque, and
Hmm.
their houses should be burned. According
Yeah.
to that narration, that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was considering burning their houses. And I
Hmm.
remember you were talking about this professor, I forgot his name, and
Hmm.
he said something that made me laugh is that he said, I believe that it was his way of teaching, his teaching style, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you, right? And then you said like something in the lines of, try this, we'll see how far it gets you. So, yes, that was
Yeah,
really
yeah. I mean,
funny
it's
to me.
yeah, because it's amazing. I mean, he's educated. That's the thing about it. He has students. He's in the university. He teaches kids, and he says that this is the Prophet's style of teaching. I mean, come on, get out of here.
Yes, right. And it's exactly. And it's funny because I was just thinking about this narration, and then I saw your video and you just mentioned this. But yes, indeed, as I mentioned, it scared me because this is the kind of things that kind of stay with you and
Hmm.
make you it sounds so much like some kind of a fear tactic
It
to
is. It
bring
is.
people to the mosque, right?
Hmm. It
Yes.
is. It is. I mean, it's traumatizing for people. Some people get traumatized by these kind of things. It's religious abuse. I mean, these kind of
Mm,
things are religious abuse. Um, the Prophet was not like that at all. Not like that at all. I mean, think about it. Even in the Sahih Hadiths, right? There's one Sahih Hadith where you have um, the man where people complained about him. It was his wife. His wife complained about him. She said to the Prophet, "This husband of mine, he never wakes up for Fajr. He never wakes up. Never mind going to the mosque. He doesn't wake up for Fajr at all, right? To pray Fajr on time." And when the Prophet asked him, he said, "Well, how come?" The man said, "I'm from a people, from a household. My household, my people. We don't get up until the sun gets up, right? We that's just how we are, right? We wake up after sunrise. We don't wake up before sunrise." And the Prophet just told him, "Well, when you wake up, pray. Simple as that, right?" It wasn't, no,
mm,
you have to make sure you wake up before Fajr, before sunrise, and pray Fajr, otherwise you've missed it. No, no, no. Listen, you see the thing about it, the Fajr Salah. Um, if you've ever like lived in like desert environment, right?
yes.
Before the time of electricity, where you put on the lights, you've got the lights on until maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, watching TV or on the computer or something like that. No, back then there was no street lights. So when the sun went down and it started to get dark, people went to sleep, right?
Mm,
And they
right.
woke up naturally. Usually, naturally, they woke up, at Fajr time because the air changes.
Mm,
When the sun comes up and the sun's rays first start to hit the atmosphere at that time, literally the smell of the air changes and it wakes people up. So people used to wake up naturally before sunrise, right? And
yes.
so that was just the normal day routine, right? People never stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, whatever. After the sun went down and after it got dark enough, people went to sleep generally, right? And they woke
Mm,
up early.
right.
Now this guy didn't. This guy, his family, he's from people who used to sleep in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Prophet said, no problem. When you wake up, pray. It's not an issue.
Exactly. I've heard about this
Hmm.
hadith. Yes, I heard
Hmm.
about this, and exactly. So, how do we reconcile that with something that says that if you do not go and pray at the mosque, you, you know, you
Yeah.
that he considered I heard one of them say that he considered burning the houses, but the only thing that stopped him from doing so is the women and the children.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that, right,
No, not even the
right,
destruction of the property, that they won't have a house to live in afterwards. Oh no, just
exactly,
the women and the children.
exactly. And
Yeah,
this, yes, and that's the kind of thing you wouldn't do to your worst enemy, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's very
yeah,
scary. And yes,
yeah.
like you mentioned, I heard about this narration where the man was woke up after the sunrise, and exactly, he just told him, wake up, pray when you wake up. So there was no need to bully people into this kind of, you know, sectarianism, right? Because
Mm,
this is kind of like sectarianism. Believe like we believe, you pray
yeah,
like we pray. Otherwise, if
yeah,
you don't follow my school of thought, you, your belief is worthless. Your
yeah,
prayers are invalid, which is not true.
yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the issue with a lot of these things is like with Dr. Jonathan Brown and others, that they have not, they've taken it for granted that the earlier scholars who they rely upon, right? The hadith collectors, the the people of fiqh, they take it for granted that they're just better than us, right? And they sorted everything out properly, and they weren't influenced by people who were themselves influenced by negative forces. Um, they just take it for granted that the early generation were cleverer than they are, were knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than they are, that they sorted out all of the narrations properly, and they didn't do any mistakes. Well, and they will admit they did some mistakes, but they also, generally, they did everything correctly, and they fail to recognize um, the influence of a lot of nefarious forces in early Islam, right? Um, and a lot of it also comes back to just they're assuming that everybody in the earlier generation um, was righteous, right? That all of the Sahaba, for example, was righteous. That's the main stumbling block for Sunni Islam. That they cannot fathom that somebody who saw the Prophet once um, wasn't some angel or paragon of virtue, right? That's how they see it. They see that anybody who is a companion of the Prophet, which means what? That they saw the Prophet at least once and then died outwardly saying, La ilaha illallah. Somebody like that is virtuous, right? And we make excuses for any evil that they do, no matter what. But the problem is when you do that, then what they did becomes part of your deen, because you are saying that they are people to be taken as guides, right? Um, so there was a lot of influence in early Islam, which was negative influence in early Islam, which was not weeded out properly, right? You have to understand that things fell apart very very quickly after Prophet died, right? I mean, by the time the last Sahabi died, right, Medina had been destroyed twice. The Kaaba had been destroyed twice, right? We'd been ruled by at least 8 tyrants. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the family of the Prophet had been massacred.
Mm-hmm.
The remaining companions of the Prophet had been branded like animals, right? The Medina had been pillaged and ransacked. Women inside it, raped. Um, a lot happened, right? We had Yazid and Muawiyah, then Yazid, then Marwan, then Abdul Malik, and then his 4 tyrant sons. All of this, right, happened while the Sahaba was still alive, right? Um, and they influenced things. They influenced things very heavily. You know, Muawiyah, for
Yes.
example, he dismissed, narrations that he dismissed over 10,000 um, imams in mosques. He dismissed them and put in their place replacements, right? Who would, of course, toe his line, right? So it's a very big issue. It's a very big issue, and they're not willing to look at it and reassess it. So when it comes to narrations like this about praying in the mosque, how you must pray in the mosque and all of that, they won't see that they don't look at the history behind it, and the situation that these narrations developed in, right? They won't look at all these countless narrations of the leaders of Medina, like the the tyrants of Medina, forcing people to come to the mosque, forcing them to
Yes.
come to the mosque, and forcing them to swear that they would not pray at home, that they must pray at the mosque. Why were they doing that? They weren't doing that because they were so concerned about them praying, right? They were doing it just to keep an eye on the resistance, on any elements of resistance, you know, to so that they won't be praying together with other people, right? So that they will be seen as legitimate, right? So that the leader of Medina, he's going to lead the prayer, and he's a tyrant who wants to pray behind a tyrant, right? Who wants to pray
Right.
behind a tyrant. So if they didn't do that, all of the righteous people would have prayed elsewhere by themselves, right? They would have gathered together around one of the pious people and prayed there, and the tyrant would be there in the mosque of the Prophet by himself, leading nobody in prayer. So he forced people to come, right? He forced them. And then he kept on doing this, and in the end, people grew up with that kind of stuff. The Umayyads were in charge, were the rulers for over 100 years, right? For over 100 years.
True.
So by the time the
Yes.
young people grew up, okay, that's what they understood. Then they were told from the pulpits, you have to pray in the mosques, and then and these hadiths were invented to keep people praying in the mosques, and to keep an eye on everybody. But if you don't study the history critically, you're not going to know where a lot of this the garbage which is in hadiths come from.
I see. Yeah, exactly. Because when we think about, there are many of those narrations that have such a big element of fear in them, and telling you that you must do it exactly like this, right? And if you don't, then you're wrong, which is
Mm,
not right. And
mm,
I had a question about another hadith, another narration. It's one that usually I believe Salafis use a lot. It's about the
mm,
stoning to death
mm,
for married fornicators,
mm.
adulterers,
Yeah,
and the Quran obviously mentions flogging the fornicators. So
mm,
in order for them to explain it, they say that the Quran only refers to unmarried ones. And even in some translations, you have, in brackets, you have the mention
yeah,
unmarried. But it
yeah.
doesn't even say that in the Arabic, right? Because the
No, it
term
doesn't.
is the same, right?
No,
Right.
it doesn't.
So,
In fact, it actually only refers to the married. Actually, the flogging is only for married. Zina, what zina is in the Quran, is extramarital sex involving a married woman. Right? If the woman is not married, it's not zina. Right? It's sifah. And the Quran calls it sifah. So, like a unmarried man with an unmarried woman, that's not zina. Okay, there's no flogging for that. There's no punishment for that. It's still haram. It's still a fahisha, right? Still, a sin, but there's no worldly punishment for it. There's no flogging. Okay, unmarried man with unmarried woman, and the same thing. Married man with an unmarried woman. Also, there's no punishment, right? It's only when the woman is married, then whether the man is married or not, they are both flogged, both. Okay, so an unmarried woman can never commit zina. An unmarried woman can never commit zina, right? Um, Whereas a married woman, with somebody other than her husband, that's always zina.
I
Okay, that's how
see.
it is. Yeah, it comes down to that, and that's why if you read like the beginning of Surah An-Nur, you'll see that very clearly. That it's all centered around um, whether the woman is married or not. Okay, and it comes back later in other verses as well, like in when it comes to the captives or the slaves. The Quran says, فَإِذَا أُحْصِنْ. So when they are married, then they get half the punishment, right? So only if they're not married, they're not punished at all. But when they're married, only when they're married, they will receive half the punishment of the women who are never captives or never slaves, right? So it comes down to the marriage of the woman.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So
Yes.
because even that's how it is biblically, right? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? Because
Yes.
it's the issue is about family and lineage, and the woman is the one who gets pregnant, right?
Right.
So in a marriage, the man is married to the woman, and if she is having an affair with somebody else, now she could be pregnant with another man's wife. This child is now the husband is cheated with regards to him, right? That he thinks it's his son. It's not his son. The other children think it's his brother. It's their brother or sister, and it isn't. The grandparents look at this child as theirs. It isn't their child, right? It's so it's part of it's about the family, right? Really, so it's about comes down to preserving the family and the lineage and these sort of things, right? Which is why it's about a married woman, right? It's not about anything else. But the reason why, of course, it came into the whole issue of stoning came into hadiths and stuff is because in Medina, when the Prophet went to Medina and he made that covenant with everybody and he united Medina, under the covenant that they had, right, the constitution of Medina. A part of that was that the Jews would maintain their deen, would maintain their laws, their their own judgments, all of that. So that's what they have. That's what they continue to do in Medina, right? But because the Prophet was seen as the leader of Medina, as the ruler of Medina, over time, things that happened that the Jews did over there, these judgments, they got attributed to the Prophet, right? So it became like, okay, he was one who ordered this person to be stoned. It wasn't. It was a Jewish man, and he was stoned by the Jews, right? Or the woman, that sort of thing. But in the end, it gets put on the Prophet because if these are oral traditions happening, being circulated, 100 years later, right? That's what it comes down to. He was the ruler of Medina. Somebody was stoned in Medina. That means he commanded it or had it done. But it's just not the case. But you even have narrations in the hadith collections. I think it's in even Bukhari or Muslim, where somebody is asked, did the Prophet have people stoned to death? And the person says yes, and then he's asked, was this before or after the verse of flogging? And the person says, I don't know, right? The narrator says, I don't know
Oh,
if it was
yes.
before or after. Okay, well, that's a pretty important thing, because what they say is that the reason why the hadith is there is try to establish whether this practice was abrogated, because that's what they think, right? But it never happened in the first place. The Prophet is not going to start stoning people to death, right? and wait, and then later a revelation will come to stop it after people have already died. Being
Right.
stoned. No. He wouldn't have done anything like that without receiving the guidance for it.
Exactly. Yes.
Mm.
Because it has to. God obviously reveals to him the commands that should be carried out. So
Yeah, as needed, exactly, as needed. I mean, even the Quran says that, وَلَا يَأْتُونَكَ بِمَثَلٍ إِلَّا جِئْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ, right? One of the questions that people asked, and it's in the Quran, right? That they say, why is this Quran not revealed all in one go? And part of the answer for that was that so that anything that comes up, we can send down to you something to deal with it, right? So if when Zina finally came up in the Ummah, God revealed that verse about the flogging. Okay, isn't that Zina came up and then the Prophet said, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh, let's stone to death the way that the Jews do, right? And he did that for like 3 or 4 people, and then the verse came and said, no, this is what you should do. No, that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes.
yes, indeed. Yes,
Mm.
and there was the famous narration about the woman who got pregnant. I believe you must have heard about it, and she kept coming
Mm.
back until she gave birth, and then she
Yeah.
nursed the baby, and eventually she was stoned to death. And
Mm.
yeah, so There.
It's all just. I mean, it's a very fairy tale kind of thing, right? It's
Yes,
not. I mean,
and then
it's made the lies about the prophet are of different levels. Some will try to like make it like sweeten it up and make it sound like all nice and lucky,
mm,
being merciful here and stuff. No, but in the end, you know, it's not. It's against the Quran, right? That's the
mhm,
bottom line when it comes to it.
true. And they say
Mm.
that if they get stoned, they go to heaven because they have been, what is the term? That's an expiation. That's what they
Yeah.
say, but
Mm.
that's that's stoning to death. I mean, they take it so lightly, in my opinion. It's
Yeah. It's one of the things which the mushrikeen are said to do in the Quran, right? If you look in the Quran, those who stone to
exactly,
death or threaten to stone others, who are they? They are always they're never the believers, right? They're
exactly.
never the believers. They're the people like Ibrahim's father said, if you don't stop, I'm going to stone you, right?
Mm,
And
yes,
those people.
exactly. It always has a negative kind of feeling to it. It's
Yeah,
talking, right? There was Abraham's father, and also, I believe, Shoaib, right? At
yeah,
some,
yeah,
right, and it's always a threat to
yeah,
stone
yeah.
somebody by, like you said, it's not mentioning the believers, but yes, they say that it does. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, and so I wanted to mention, to speak a little bit about, we touched down upon this a little bit about fornication. So, yes, because I've wondered, marriage these days, sometimes it's a little difficult. I've been looking into, I mean, just for, not because I personally want to get married, but just because I wanted to acquire some knowledge on this topic of marriage.
Mm.
So I looked into it, and I hear that there must be four witnesses, and that there must be a dowry,
Mm.
and then also some other things I'm not so familiar with. And I
Mm.
don't know if you've heard about it. It's Mufti Abu Layth. He mentioned that that nowadays it's difficult to get married, and scholars haven't been doing a good job at keeping up with the present time. That, for
Mm.
example, if people don't go through all this, let's say, I don't know how to call it, the technical thing, would it
Mm.
still be considered a marriage without perhaps all the you know the
Yeah,
dowry and all these aspects,
yeah,
or would it be closer to fornication, right? So what is what are your views about this,
yeah.
brother?
When it comes to marriage, what comes up again and again in the Quran is that it's a lot of things comes down to al-ma'ruf. Al-ma'ruf means basically the customs, right? Right. That's how what marriage is in the end is about. It's about how it's a social custom and contract, right? Um, if a society views two people as married, they are married. Okay, they are married. Doesn't matter how it came about, right? This is even in the fiqh, that, for example, if um, some non-Muslim couple, right, become Muslim, right? Non-Muslim couple become Muslim, and if the whole neighborhood, the whole society knows them as married, they are married. It doesn't matter if the dowry was given, or if the what's mentioned in the Quran was done or not, right? And that doesn't matter, right? What matters is that everybody knows that they are married. Okay, that's what it comes down to in the end. That's what marriage is supposed to be. So when it comes to marriage in the Quran, the way it's talked about, it's very simple, right? It's what a contract is made, right? And there has to be witnesses. It doesn't have to be four witnesses, just witnesses, right? Yeah, I think in the Quran it talks about two witnesses, not four. And yes, it talks about giving a dowry as well, right? That you should give a dowry for the women, because in the end that's part of like their security, right? the sort of security, but she should be given a dowry, right? As much as you can, right? According to your ability. But I definitely agree with Mufti Abu Layth that scholars have been keeping up with making marriage easier, and people making understanding of marriage easier for people nowadays, right? But a lot of the problems isn't down to the scholars. I think it's down to cultural problems, right? A lot of the times, parents and background culture, which is making things more difficult for the kids to get, their children to get married, right? So, yeah. Well, but marriage is very simple. It doesn't have to be a complicated thing, right? The end goal of the steps of the marriage, whatever it is that the people around you, the people her family, your family, they recognize that you two are married, right? And that's known, right? That the society, that the community knows, this is a married couple, your husband and wife, right? Um, um, Once that's achieved, right, that it's a marriage. Okay, if that's achieved, it's a marriage. If a couple of young people get together and they just do something which nobody around them, their parents don't recognize it as a marriage, their neighbors don't recognize it as a marriage, right? The community around them doesn't recognize it as a marriage. It's not a marriage. Okay, it's not a marriage.
True.
There has to be something which people recognize as a marriage, depending on where you are, right? So
Yes.
a lot of it does contain. There's a big element of customs and culture and what is known. Al-ma'ruf. The Quran talks about al-ma'ruf, what is known. Okay, what the people there know, and that can be different. It can be different in Japan, Australia, Europe, South Africa, Saudi Arabia. It might be a little bit different, right? But the point is, in the society, what society recognizes as marriage, that is marriage.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And there was this, yes. So this a, a, a a friend told us in Brother Muji's live stream that Yasser Qadi, he made a statement that I completely disagree with. He said something in the lines of, from what I've understood, from what this brother was telling us, that apparently he said that temporary marriage is okay for, let's say, high school students because they're going to fornicate anyway, so at least they get a temporary marriage. And apparently it's better than fornication, but it's temporary. How on earth can one make such a claim that it's going to be over very, very soon? It's very temporary, and it's known that it's going to come to an end. So it defies the purpose of marriage, in my opinion, because the main purpose of marriage, I believe, is commitment, raising families, building communities. But if you're just gonna do it just for it to provide an outlet for one's desires, then that makes no sense. It's like, forgive me for saying, but it's like prostitution, in my opinion, because the whole point is just to express your desires in that way, in that regard, within, and just by putting the label marriage on top of it, it makes it all better, but it sounds a lot like prostitution to me. So, what do you think about this? I believe it's temporary marriage,
Yeah,
perhaps
muta.
mota. Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
muta. Yeah.
Right.
I've heard, of course, a lot of people look, because the issue now is, of course, we've been, living in the West and things. We've taken on the idea that marriage is about a sacrament, like it's a holy thing, right? It's a sacrament. That's how it is in the West and in sort of like the Christian mind, and we've sort of taken that on, right? But It doesn't have to be, right? In terms of the Quran and things like it, it's a contract, right? And of course, a lot of people start to, look at muta and say it's like zina and it's just like prostitution and stuff like that. And a lot of that is just because of this, the sectarian split between Sunnis and Shia. So a lot of Sunnis attack Shia for that reason. Okay, but in the end, look. God isn't micromanaging our marriage lives, right? I mean, that's one of the things which I was trying to show today, right? He's not trying to micromanage everything about how we go about doing things, right? When it comes to muta marriage, in the end of the day, it is a marriage. If everything else, like if you take it as the Muslim way of the traditional Muslim way of doing marriages, it's all part of that. So she's given a dowry, right? The community knows them, recognizes the marriage. It's not just like a secret boyfriend, girlfriend. The parents don't know anything about it. No, right? The families know they're married, right? When the time period is over, she has a waiting period, right? It's a divorce, like a normal divorce. The muta marriage is in every single way. It's exactly the same as a normal marriage, right? Then there's no difference other than time period, right? Now that can be 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it is, right? But it doesn't take away from the fact that it is a marriage. It doesn't take away from the fact that the children born in there, those two are the legitimate, are the mother and father, right? There's no that they will inherit from them, that they will be that they will inherit from the grandparents, okay? That he has to look after that child, that he has to look after her, right? All of the normal things of marriage apply to a muta marriage, okay? So it's nowhere near prostitution, right? Prostitution is just like a woman could a prostitute woman would have like 5 men in a week or something, right? That's not possible in a muta marriage, right? You can't have like 5 muta marriages in a week, right? Because the woman has a waiting period, right? 3 months, and then she can marry again, right? And on top of that, she can't, the same once she's divorced from that man, she can only marry and divorce him another 2 times, and the same as again a normal marriage, right? Because when a woman gets divorced, and then they marry again, divorce again, marry again, and that's it. Maximum 3 divorces, and then she's not allowed to marry the same man again. Okay, so in every aspect, it is the same. But what Yasir Qadi is saying that they should just do. I mean, I don't know exactly how he put it, but the way you're saying it, that he put it, I definitely wouldn't agree with that. I mean, it's not something to just be taken lightly like that. That it's just a substitution for boyfriend and girlfriend relationships. No. But in terms of muta marriage in and of itself, it is a legitimate marriage, right? If people accept it, then it's acceptable, right? If people don't accept it, right, then it's not acceptable, right? If the society doesn't accept it, you can have a marriage which has like a time period to it, right? Then it's not acceptable, right? But it can be useful, right? For example, like a woman who marries, who is not sure about the man she's being married to, not sure about, like maybe her parents are telling her, marry this man, it'll be okay, and she's not sure about it, right? She'll say, okay, I'll marry him, but we'll make it a muta marriage for example, 1 year, and before the end of that time, you can revoke the divorce, right? So you can say, okay, fine, I'm not going to revoke the divorce, right? It can be used as a way to stop women being trapped in marriages, right? Especially now, because in a lot of places, it's not easy for women to divorce, right? The woman can't divorce as easily as she should be able to. Okay, and it's all just in the power of the man. So she can have it as a muta marriage for 6 months, 1 year, right? And if she's happy with it, and she's seeing that she's happy to remain in this marriage, she's not going to be stuck in it, trying to leave and she can't, then she can revoke the divorce period. You just get together again, and it's the families understand, and it's it's declared, the witnesses, that the muta period has been removed, and now it's just a normal indefinite marriage. Okay, so it has its utility, right? It has its utility, and in the end, again, it's not it's the point of marriage is to protect um, both the man and the woman, right? Um, from the consequences of zina, right? So if he's married to her and she's married him, he knows that the children are his. She knows the children. He's going to look after her. You have all of the trappings of that, right? That that if he divorces her, that she has to wait 3 months, right, before she can marry again. It's all of the protections which are in a marriage. They're in a muta marriage, right? It's exactly it. There's no difference.
Oh, yes. Oh, I see. And yes, I wanted to say that I seek forgiveness in all life. I might have, mentioned anything that is inaccurate, because the way you explain it makes it much better than I have heard, which is why I was mentioned this.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
now I understand. Okay, so any mistake is just mine, and
yeah. That's fine. Don't worry about
Allah
it.
is free from it, right? Because yes, I've always been told by Sunni clerics, for the most part, that this was basically like this, but the
Yeah,
way you
because
explain it,
the issue is they've got to axe to grind against the Shia, right? And the
right?
issue with them as well is that the issue is that they accept the muta marriage was allowed. That's the odd thing about it. In Sunni Islam, it's complete consensus between the Shia and the Sunnis that muta was allowed, right, during the Prophet's lifetime, right? The Sunnis say that it was allowed for a period and then it was made haram, and then it was made halal again, and then it was made haram, and then the Prophet died, so it's haram forever. Okay,
Right.
now
Yes.
that's the traditional Sunni position, which is a ridiculous position. Haram halal, haram halal. What do you mean? You know, because it's thing. And now that it's haram, you call it zina, right? Well, then when
Yes.
it was, it hasn't changed. The thing itself hasn't changed, right? It's
Exactly.
exactly the same, right? So if you're going to call it prostitution or zina, then you're basically saying that the times when and you justify it by these, of course they have arguments to justify it. Um, well, the same thing was being done in the Prophet's lifetime, right? According to you, and so you have to say that the Sahaba were committing zina, or that it was prostitution. It wasn't. Okay, it wasn't zina. It wasn't prostitution. It was just a marriage. And the Salafis in the end, they have the what's called the misyar marriage, or they have all these other forms of marriages as well, which is different. And in the end, a person can get married and divorce within a week, or within a day, within 2 days, 3 days. It doesn't change anything. The difference between with a muta marriage is that you've already set a divorce date, right? There are men who get married already planning to divorce, right? They're like they get
Exactly.
married and they're like, okay, I'm gonna marry you, and they're just doing it
Yes.
to thing, and then within like a month they divorce. Um,
Exactly. It's the same ruling,
yeah,
because
it's the same thing, right? So doesn't change much, right? It doesn't
exactly,
change much.
exactly. And many
Mm,
people do that.
mm.
They enter into a relationship and marriage, and then they know that they're not going to stay together. But yes, it makes perfect sense, because out of ignorance I mentioned this, but prostitution is very different, because prostitution are mostly, one night, and it's different men, and it is very,
Yeah.
very different. Exactly. But the way
Mm.
you said it makes perfect sense. And I have perhaps one last thing to mention, and then I'll probably go.
Yeah.
But
Good.
yes, thank you, brother. I wanted to ask you about, like, for example, you mentioned something interesting about, Zina, that is only between married, couples, and the other one is a lesser evil, from what I've understood. And so, what about, for example, out here in the West, we have obviously, people who be friends, boyfriends and girlfriends, and they're not necessarily married, but they just, stay together and all this. There's no contract, there's no marriage per se. So, what is the Islamic kind of ruling about such a thing? Let's say it's
Yeah,
it's it's still like you mentioned.
yeah,
Yes, it
it's a
would be.
sin. Yeah, it's
Yes.
a sin. It's a fahisha. It's a fahisha. Fahisha in the Quran, indecency, right? It's a fahisha. It's a sin. But it's just in terms of punishment, worldly punishment. It's not given a worldly punishment, and it's not one of the major sins, right? The Zina is a major sin, right? And it's not about the couple being married. It really comes down to if the woman is married or not, right? If the woman is married or not. Of course, she's married, of course, to a man who's married to her. So yes, but in terms of who she's having an affair with, that man could be married or not married. But if she's married, it's zina. Okay, if she's married, it's zina, and that's what it comes down to. But if she's not married, or if you have the two unmarried together, that's just a thing. That's just yeah, it's a fahisha. It's a fahisha, but at the same time, look, there are people who have these relationships in a very committed way, right? So
Yes.
you have, for example, a couple who have been together, for example, for 10 years, right? And so
Yes.
one good sort of like rule that they have in the West now is they call cohabitation, right? That if a man and woman have lived together for that extended period of time, right, for a long enough period of time, they are considered to be married under the law. Okay, and it's the same sort of thing. Why they're considered to be married under the law? Because by every sort of like social metric, right, they are living as a married couple, right? They live together, they've had children together, they are faithful to each other, but they haven't actually done a marriage, right? um,
True.
yeah, and that sort of way, in the same way, like if these two were to convert to Islam, they'd be considered married. They'd be considered married automatically. They wouldn't have to do an actual marriage, right? And I'm
Okay.
talking about traditionally, like for example, in the Maliki madhab, they'd automatically be considered married, right? Because their status is that's how they are living. They are living as if they're married, right? And if they had converted earlier, and been told to marry, they would have been married, right? But in terms of just the hookup culture sort of thing that's in the West now, no, that's a sin because of what it can lead to, um, you know um, um, unwanted children, unwanted pregnancies, emotional damage, a lot of things, right? It's not, um, it's a fahish and it's a sin, but it's not one of the kabair. It's not one of like the major sins. Okay,
Yes.
and it's important to understand that because Allah says in the Quran that if you stay away from the major sins, right, we will forgive everything else, right?
Exactly.
If you stay away from all of the major sins and indecencies, you will forgive everything else and you will enter into Jannah. I think because in the end, look, as much as it is, yes, it is sinful and a fahisha, and it's sort of like it's like somebody not thinking of their actions properly. Um, when it's these like now in the West, young people hooking up together and stuff like that, it's not that it's these are sort of like sins of passion, or of lust, and they're not thinking about the future, and the harm and damage is something which comes later, right? They are not actually harming anybody in doing that, right? They are both
Yes.
actually doing, you know, um, um, doing things that they both want to. Nobody's harming anybody else, right? Nobody is
Exactly.
like, nobody is, intruding on a marriage, for example, like in Zina, right? There's
Exactly.
no, there's no like huge harm in that. The harm comes, the effects of that in society, right? The lewdness in society, the immorality in society, unwanted children, a huge amount of unwanted pregnancies, kids born out of wedlock. They don't know who the father is. A woman has a child and she doesn't even, she has to choose on TV between five men. Who do you think the father is? It's crazy, right? Um, so
Yes.
these issues, right? These are
Yes.
the issues which are problematic because of that. That's why it's sinful. It's not really sinful because of two people pursuing that pleasure with each other. That isn't the sinful thing. That in the end is a natural thing, right? The same thing is done in marriage, right? There's
Yes.
nothing actually inherently wrong with that, but it's just that
Exactly.
it's not. We are not animals, right? We don't.
Yes.
We,
Exactly.
yeah, we have we have to think.
Yes.
We have to think of the future a little bit, right? Animals
E-
don't have a concept of the future, right?
Exactly.
Of of holding themselves back, having taqwa, holding themselves back due to any future harms, or and animals don't think about their society at large. They don't think of that. We
Mm.
have to be better than that.
We do. Exactly. And of course, it's not a good thing, but like I disagree with when Salafi said, and it's like it's not like you're hurting anybody, but in the case of stealing, I mean, stealing is far worse. But you know what this Salafi said? His name is Dawa Man. I think you must have known about him. You must have heard about him.
Yeah.
He said something, and I couldn't answer because I wasn't there, but if I was, I would have answered. He asked his students, his audience, what would you rather your mother see you doing, stealing or committing fornication? As if stealing, it's such, I would prefer not being seen doing such a thing, because stealing is so evil. And yet
Mm.
he kept on saying that fornication is worse than stealing. And I'm like, it doesn't even make sense, because the Quran itself, even in the case of fornication, it's flogging, but in the case of stealing, it's, chopping of the hand. So
Mm.
it's far worse to steal. But
Yeah,
yes, what do you
exactly.
think about this, brother?
No, that's right. I mean, zina is worse than stealing, right? But fornication, when we talk about fornication, I'm talking about sifah. So again, two who are not married. Okay, no, that's not worse than stealing. Stealing is worse than that. Stealing is one of the kabair. It's one of the big sins. Okay, that's why the sin. If you wanna, I should really do a stream about this or a video about this. But if you wanna recognize what are the big sins in the Quran, they are the things for which a threat of hellfire is given. Right. So if you see something mentioned, and then God threatens hellfire for it. For example, eating consuming the wealth of orphans, right? Right. The Quran talks, those who consume the wealth of orphans, they are only they are only eating into their bellies the fire, fire, and they will enter the fire, right? So that's a threat. So that's a kabir. It's one of the kabair. It's one of the big sins, right? Or it's something for which there's a worldly punishment for it, right? These are the big sins. The things for which there's a worldly punishment for it, or a hellfire is threatened for it. Okay, um, so sifah is not one of them, right? But theft is, and zina is.
Mm,
Yeah, and so is, for example,
exactly.
another one is slandering married women, which is another reason why, again, it helps you understand that zina is about married women, right?
Mm,
Because if you slander a married woman and you don't have four witnesses, again, you get lashes, 80 lashes. Okay, but
exactly.
there's no lashes for slandering a married man, for example, right? A married
True.
man. Yeah, there's no. It's about slandering a married woman. Okay, because if you say a married woman has committed zina, then based on that, she could be punished for zina, and the man who you slandered her with, because of course it's always two, right? Nobody did. It never happens where a woman is punished for zina and a man is not. It always has to be together, right? Because it takes two to tango, right? So when you slander, when you slander a married woman, you are pushing for her to be punished, and for the man who you are claiming she was with to be punished as well, right? And so because that's another one of the big sins. Another one of the big sins is to slander a married woman, right? So that, for example, is worse than fornication, right?
Sure. Exactly. All right. Thank you very much, brother, for answering all of my questions. This was very insightful.
No problem.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed your explanations and your breaking downs of the points. And yes, very great channel. May Allah bless you, brother. And
you're welcome. Thank you so much, and you're welcome anytime, of course.
Welcome.
And,
thank you very much, brother.
No problem.
And Brother Muji, he left a comment. I believe you saw it, but
yes, he asked for me to come on next Saturday. I'll try to do that definitely next Saturday. I'm not going to be doing a stream, so I'll try to come on to his. Okay.
All right, that's great.
Okay. Brilliant.
All right, thank you, brother.
Okay. No problem. Jazakallah khair.
Yes.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Hey, Hector. Good to see you. Walaikum assalam. Doing well today. What was it? I'm just checking the comments in a minute before we close off. Yeah, Adriana, she was, how are you? Hope you're well. Good to see you. Yeah, we did a stream about this. I don't know if you remember. Can you marry somebody who is not a Muslim, but also not mushrik? And so remember we did the stream about this, like who you can and can't marry is all mentioned in Surah An-Nur. It's all listed, right? حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم, haram for you to marry all your mothers and your daughters, etc. The whole long list, right? At the end of it says, and all other women are halal for you. You can marry them, right? Who you can and can't marry has got nothing to do with religion, right? In terms of if you're allowed to marry them, if it's a legitimate marriage, or if it isn't. Okay, the verse which talks about don't marry the mushrikeen until either if you read it with the reading until they have faith, or until you are safe from them, right? Till you feel safe from their shirk, right? It's about that. It's not about. It's more about recommendation. It's not about whether a marriage is legit or not legit, or it's allowed or it's not allowed, right? The things which prevent marriage are blood relations, and also the breastfeeding relationships as well. I'll talk. Inshallah, I would like to talk about it now, but it's getting a bit late where I am now, so I'm gonna have to close it up. But it's which stream was it? Let me check for you. And I will put it in the. I'll put the link for it. It was the stream. The stream is called Marrying Mushriks. Let's see if I can find it. Which one was it? Here it is, number 61. Okay, so let me just put that in the chat. Yeah, this one. So if you want to look in that, and if you have any questions about it, of course, feel free to put a comment or come on next time, and and I'll address it then. Anyway, thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and inshallah I'll see you again next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.